Good morning and thank you for joining us. We're in the Hive apiary here today and it's beginner beekeeping Q&A. So if you've got any questions, put them in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. We all started off as new beekeepers once, so don't be shy. Put your questions in below and we'll get to answering those. Also let us know whereabouts in the world you are tuning in from. That's always helpful to know. We've got a community of beekeepers all around the world now, which is just fantastic, all communicating, all helping each other learn. The whole idea is we help each other learn, we answer the questions, and that helps everyone look after their bees and in the end harvest some beautiful honey. So questions in the bottom, we'll get to answering those. Meanwhile, let's just harvest a bit of honey because it's springtime here in the southern hemisphere. And you can see here, we've got a lot of honey in these frames. We've harvested a couple of these frames recently and they've filled them straight back up again, which is exciting to see. And it's wonderful when you get the bees really healthy, lots of them in the hive, coinciding with a big nectar flow like the spring here in the southern hemisphere. They really go and get a lot of nectar and turn it into a lot of honey. And lucky for us, they store more than they need and we can share some too. So let's just have a look at this hive. We've got a lot of bees coming in the front. We've got a lot of bees in the side window, looking really good, looking really healthy. You can see them coming and going from the landing board, bringing their pollen on their hind legs as they fly back from their big journey back from the flowers. They're foraging up to 10 kilometres in radius, about 6 miles, which is incredible, and bringing the nectar and pollen back into the hive to create this gorgeous honey. So the way we harvest, if you're new to this, is we get this key here and we put it into the frame. This is the frame my father and I spent a decade inventing, and you simply turn it. And what's happening is channels are forming inside the comb, allowing the honey to flow down to the bottom, and you can see it there coming already ready to flow down the tube and into a jar. And over time that'll pick up and we'll see beautiful honey flowing. Oh, look at this. This is interesting. We often get a question, is there any debris in the honey? And sometimes there can be. You can see here there's a whole lot of waxy bits that have fallen through as the bees make it. It's pretty unusual, but there it is. You can give it a little clean out if you like, otherwise it'll just float to the top of the jar and you can just simply skim it off. Wow. That's the wild quince, which is a very aromatic flavour. It's a beautiful flavour pouring out of the hive into these jars here. So as you can see, that was just the initial bit of wax that the bees must have chewed up and it had fallen through in the trough area. It doesn't usually happen, but it can happen sometimes. Any questions coming through from our beginner beekeepers? No such thing as a silly question. Today is dedicated for anyone to ask anything they like. We all started off as new beekeepers once, so don't be shy. Put it in the comments below and we'll get to answering them.
We've got a question from Matthew, who's in the Hunter Valley, and he asks, how often do you requeen and how many hives do you have there? Okay,
there's about 20 hives just here, and I've got another 40 at my place, and my sister's got another 20 at my place now. She's been breeding them up quickly. How often do we requeen? For me, it's not often. I do it on an as-need basis. Commercial beekeepers will requeen every couple of years because they're after the production. They need that extra 10%, 20% production from a really virile working queen. They can't afford to have hives that aren't really performing at their best. So they'll requeen for that reason. But really I will requeen if a hive's aggressive is the main reason, or if the hive is really struggling and just not picking up like the other hives are. Otherwise I let them do their thing, and if it's a healthy hive and they're producing some honey, then I'm happy.
I've got a question, Cedar. What are the health benefits of eating honey?
So honey is full of minerals, phytonutrients, enzymes, vitamins, and it's also got medicinal properties that can heal wounds, often depending on what species the bees have been foraging on what flowering species. So they do say beekeepers live longer. I'm actually 80 years old, so it's probably working for me. And but who knows? It's whether that's a myth or not. But we do know that honey is highly medicinal, highly beneficial, and can even heal wounds that some of our medicines cannot. So it's pretty neat stuff.
Lisa says she is wondering if there's anything she could do about mould in the brood boxes, and is this a problem?
Okay, mould in the brood box. So if you're getting mould in the brood box, this is the brood box at the bottom. Here it's filled with conventional wooden frames. The bees are drawing their own wax and they're laying their eggs in the queen's laying her eggs in the comb and so on. If you're getting mould down there, it probably means your colony's not strong enough to look after all of the surfaces. So it might be a good idea to pack down your hive and make it a bit smaller, so you can take the Cedar off and requeen it, so that you've got a lot more bees coming through from a new virile queen that you can then count on the bee numbers in the hive, looking after all the surfaces and keeping them free from mould and so on. Also make sure you're not getting a lot of water coming actually into your brood box. And if it's out in the shade, move it into the sun. So a few things there.
Abby asks, I've just purchased a classic hive and am in Armidale, New South Wales. Do I need to partly cover the entryway at this time of year for a new colony?
Generally here where I am, I don't reduce the entrance at all. Flow hive entrances are slightly smaller than conventional Langstroth entrances, and that's for a reason. And that's to limit those robbing behaviours and things, but it's still an adequate size entrance for ventilation and for when the hive is strong. I don't use entrance reducers, but if you're in a really cold climate, generally a bit colder than where you're getting snow build up and all of that, generally you would use entrance reducers when you get those times with no flowers and the bees can get really hungry and start looking to rob out other hives and so on, especially if you've accidentally left honey out, which you shouldn't do, and that can get the bees into a stealing honey mode instead of looking for flowers. In that case, a good idea to reduce your entrance size down. We have entrance reducers, or you can simply poke a couple of bits of wood or something like that in either side, just to reduce the size of the entrance the bees are flying out of at the front there.
Ronan asks, I was wondering, when you start harvesting the flow frames and some bees are working on the non-capped cells, do they not get crushed?
No, so I put a lot of effort into that. So it's a decade of development and trying different things, and the goal for me was to make something easy to harvest and more gentle on the bees than the current conventional process. Conventionally, you're in there, you're ripping apart the hive, you're trying to get all the bees off the frames, or you're using a leaf blower, and the whole process, you squash many bees. You just can't help it if your hives are healthy and there's lots of bee numbers. So part of my inspiration was to reduce that stress on the bees. So when it came to design, there was an important step which we made a whole patent about, which was instead of making our cells like this, which how we started off, and they move and come back, we put a gap there. So the bees have to bridge the gap between here and here on each cell. And what that means is if there are bees down cells, let's say the frame wasn't fully capped and there was bees down the cells, and you moved it like that and you moved it back again, then this wax is broken here and they can't get a leg or wing caught in this area. So if the parts were to meet fully, you could imagine you could go like that and a bee could put a leg or a wing or their head through and it comes back, and that wouldn't be good. But instead we've put that gap, it goes up, comes back, and there's this broken. At worst there's a bit of wax that they're a bit caught up in, and the other bees could help them out in that case. But generally it works very well.
Kathleen is about to do her first inspection and would like to know what she should look out for.
Great, so first brood inspection, You've probably just got your brood box set up yet, you haven't got your super on, and what you're mainly going to be looking out for is whether you have brood and young larvae or grubs down the cells. That's showing you the presence of a laying queen. So we've got lots of videos at the beekeeper.org if you want to have a look there. It's also a fundraiser, that beekeeping course, or we've also got lots of YouTube videos showing you through your first brood inspections as well. And the idea is, of course, you've got your bee suit, you've got your smoker, get some help if you're feeling nervous about it. You're taking the lid off and you're lifting up those frames and just having a look, staring in at that world of what the bees are doing. And you should see brood in the cells, or at least some young larvae grubs, showing you that you have a laying queen in there. And that's probably all you need to look for on your first brood inspection. You don't need to overwhelm yourself with getting into looking through everything, learning everything at once. Just get in there, marvel in at the world, check that you've got a laying queen, put it all gently back again, and that'll be a great first brood inspection.
Can you explain a bit about how bees fly and even how quickly their wings beat while they fly?
So bees are incredible little flyers. Look at them go. Look how fast they're going. And a hive like this could pollinate 50 million flowers in a day. And if you add up all the bee flight, it's multiple times around the world. So bees almost defy the laws of nature in terms of what is possible. Their wings beat at 240 cycles a second, and they fly up to about 40 kilometres or 30 miles an hour. So on really windy days, they're going to make use of the ground, I guess the friction of wind lower down to get to where they're going. On days that are less windy, their flying speed, they can outfly the wind and just cut a nice track straight to the flowers. So such incredible little insects, and we really do owe it to them for the amazing amount of pollination they do for so many foods we eat.
Chris in Perth would like to know what happens to the wax and caps once you've finished harvesting.
Okay, that's a great question. Through a decade of development, we had all sorts of crazy contraptions pulling the capping off in the side, because conventionally you've got to pull the capping off the frames in order to harvest. Now, lucky for us, we didn't need to do that, and the bees are very quick to notice that the honey has disappeared from beneath the capping, beneath their feet, and they are quick to start chewing the capping away, remodeling the cells, and the whole process starts again. Oh, hello. We've got a bee coming for the honey. Now, if you notice that, good idea to cover up your jars with some kitchen wrap or some wax wrap. But if you do find bees coming for the honey or getting in the honey, you can just put it back on the landing board like that, and the other bees will clean them up quite quickly. But what you want to avoid is if there's a dearth and the bees are really hungry and they're in a robbing mode and they're coming for the honey, you don't want hundreds of bees actually getting to the honey. So you want to minimise the time you have honey uncovered available to the bees. So look at this little bee.
Bettina would like to know, can you have these flow hives in any small backyard?
So people keep bees at rooftops, in cities, balconies, in cities, and also in backyards everywhere. So the great thing is a beehive doesn't take up much space, it's just a very small footprint, but they're foraging on such a big radius of flowers, and that means you can keep them in small confined backyards and even on balconies, and really enjoy the process of making a real amount of produce. So it's one way that we can do some real farming, I guess, where we're producing produce from a very small footprint. So it's exciting in that way, and people in the city do amazingly well with their bees because of all of the species of things people plant around the city.
Travis says, I've heard some people having trouble turning the key to open the flow frames. Have you ran into this? And if so, what do you recommend if this happens?
Okay, so if it's hard to turn the key, just do it in segments like we did. It often is hard to turn the key. I'll just give you a demo. So if you just put the key all the way in, you're in the bottom slot there, and you try and turn it, often it's like, "Urgh." Sometimes you can just turn it, but often their wax and propolis is so strong that it's quite hard to turn. But the simple answer is you can just turn the key, put it in a little way and turn it, and put it in a little way further and turn it again and again. And that just makes it easier to turn that key. Okay.
Anna asks a question about when to add the flow super to the brood box after a new swarm and hive setup.
Okay, the best time to add the super, which is this box here, is when the bees have built out all the combs in the bottom box. So do your inspection, lift up the combs. You want to get to the point where all of the frames have been drawn out, as in they've built their wax throughout every frame and they're starting to use every frame. And that means you'll have a lot of bees in there, you'll have a full brood box already, and when you put your super on, it'll be less time before they start using it. You don't want to get into a situation, particularly if it's cool, where you're adding more boxes before they're ready. That just gives them a big amount of space to look after, and it's a bit harder for them to raise their brood like that. Okay, we're just getting a couple of interested bees here, and if you get that, it's a good idea to either cover it up or perhaps finish off your honey harvest. So what I'm going to do is, hello, what are you doing up there? Put this key into the top slot like this, pushing it all the way. Can be a little bit firm. If it's too firm to push in, you can give it a bit of a turn as you go. All the way to the back. You should feel it stop at the back to make sure you're getting the whole frame. And then it's a case of just turning it to a 90. And a good idea to leave it there for a minute or so, just to make sure all of those parts are moving back into their correct position. So you want, if you think about all the wax and propolis in the frame, if you just give it a little quick turn like that and move on to the next frame, then they might just kind of bounce back and not be forming true hexagon shapes, in which case you run into problems down the stream with wax build-up causing spills in the hive and so on. You want to make sure it stays like that for a minute or so, pushing all of those parts back into line. Okay. Great questions, keep them coming.
Hobo's Gold asks, I see that you don't use an ideal. Is that a cooler climate thing? I'm in Victoria.
Okay, so ideal super is like a shallower box. These are called deep, this size, but an ideal is a shallower size box, often used for collecting honeycomb. So we don't make that size box, we just stick to the one size. However, if you want to add shallower size boxes for collecting honeycomb, you can go ahead and do that. Get out there and experiment, try all sorts of things, see what works for you, and that's a fun thing to do to collect a bit of honeycomb. You can also collect honeycomb under the lid of the hive by pulling the cap out, and you might want to confine the area with a Tupperware kind of dish in the top, or you can also collect some honeycomb from down in the brood box. Usually the ones on the side will be honey, and in the centre is where they've got their brood.
Warren in Brisbane would like to know, he says, we have our hive in partial shade on the edge of a forest and we're suffering a lot of hive beetle at the moment. Would you relocate to full sun, and would that be beneficial?
Okay, partial shade is pretty good, especially if the shade's in the afternoon. If you can get some shade in the afternoon, particularly in summer, that's wonderful for the bees. Helps them with cooling the hive and regulating the temperature. However, as you see here, these hives are in full sun all day. If I was to choose full sun over full shade, I would choose full sun, because sometimes you can get things like chalk brood build up in the shade. However, hive beetle, I don't think they're so choosy between shade or sun. I just think some areas have a lot of hive beetles, and if the colony's weak, then get out there and trap some of those hive beetles. Generally, if the colony's strong, you don't have to worry about them. They will look after the hive and corral those beetles into the corners and stop them from laying in your hive.
Abby says, I noticed with my first inspection that the bees are building comb on top of a couple of the frames. Is that normal?
So yeah, that is quite normal to get some comb build up on top of the frames in the brood box or up here. It's a sign of a very healthy hive. They're looking for more space to store honey. Now, if they're looking for more space to store honey, perhaps it's a good time to harvest some of your honey and give them some more space to refill those frames again. So today we're doing beginner beekeeping, no such thing as a silly question. We've got time for a few more questions. The whole idea is we're helping each other learn and passing on the knowledge that we know. So also get in there and help others by answering questions that you know the answer to in the thread.
Cedar, do bees fart?
Not that I know of. There is some strange noises that come out of beehives, but it's usually the queen making noises that can sound a bit like a fart, and that the queen will communicate for a myriad of reasons, and it can be a war cry in terms of she will fight other virgin queens to the death in the hive to make sure she still has the reign, and that can be a piping, tooting, kind of almost a frog-like noise sometimes you'll hear. But bees, they don't defecate in the hive. They will always do that out. They're very hygienic like that. So what you'll find is if the bees have been in the hive for a while, stuck in there, like perhaps there's like a cold winter, or perhaps it's been raining for a week, then all of a sudden when there's a moment and the clouds part and it's a nice warm day, they'll be flying out and you'll see these yellow dots falling sometimes on the front of the hive, sometimes out the front, and that is actually bee poo. And yeah, some people wonder what those yellow dots are from, but it probably is bee poo.
Angela asks, my hive swarmed 3 times already this season, taking a lot of our hive. How long will it take for them to fill the top box again? I'm new to all of this. Also, there's not many bees in the top box at all and no honey. Any advice?
Okay, if you've got ultra swarmy genetics like that, it could be a good idea to replace the queen with some known genetics from a breeder. What happens if you've got really swarmy genetics can be exciting. They breed up really fast, but then they keep taking off. And if you're there to catch them, well great, you can build up an apiary quite quickly. But it's hard to be around all day waiting for your hive to swarm and watching where they go. So it could be a good idea to get in there, take the old queen away, wait a day, introduce a new queen that you've ordered from a breeder, and that'll make those swarmy tendencies go away. And often you can have a hive that'll go through multiple seasons without swarming if you've got the genetics. The hive outside my door has now been 4.5 years without swarming, and that's just because the genetics of that hive. So it is a genetic trait that can be bred out a little bit and can be a bit easier to manage. For that reason, when you're catching swarms, some people's advice is to requeen a swarm straight away, but others are to let them go for it and requeen down the track if it becomes a problem with swarming bees.
John asks, what is the best way to requeen a hive? I have 2 hives and they killed the queen I introduced.
Okay, so the most tried and tested method is you get in there, you take the old queen away, you wait about 24 hours, and then you go back in and reintroduce the new queen in a little queen cage that'll come from your queen breeder. Usually it has about 5 escort bees to feed her in the male, because the queen doesn't feed herself. There's a block of candy at the end, and when you put that into the hive, the bees then chew away at that candy block, and she's released into the hive a few days later. And in that time, the bees then have gotten used to the new pheromone of the queen. Sometimes you'll do all of that and the hive will go and kill the queen you've introduced. So it's a bit of the luck of the draw there. If you've got a situation where the hive has been queenless for weeks, then it becomes harder and harder for a hive to accept a new queen for some reason. So let's say you've let a month go by, the numbers are really dwindling, and the workers are starting to lay drones everywhere. then it can be really hard to get the hive to take a new queen, and that you might want to merge that hive with another colony. You might want to come up with a new strategy. Perhaps you put some more frames in from another hive that they can raise their own queen from and give that a go. But yeah, if you see the numbers dropping and you realise there's no queen, requeen as soon as you can, or give the hive the resources to do so with some frames from another hive that have some little bee eggs down the cells. And then they can raise a new queen from that.
Mon in Melbourne asks, is December Christmas break, when I have more free time, too late and too hot to set up my first hive?
Okay, good idea to ask your local beekeepers, and depending on how you're getting the bees, often when you get them is the time to do your setup. December is still midsummer here, so I would say no, it's not too late. You can go ahead and set up your hives in Melbourne, and you could even, it might be a good idea to take a split at that time. So go and find somebody who's got lots of bees, they're crawling all up the front of the hive, and you'll actually be doing them a favour to take some of their frames away, complete with bees, from the brood nest. And that can be a great way to start. We've got lots of videos showing you how to take splits from hives. And the other one is you can order a nucleus, which is a starter box, or you can order a full-size box and start from that. The later in the season you go, the more bees you want to start with. So let's say you're in autumn, you might want to go for finding someone who's got a whole Langstroth hive just to buy and convert to a flow hive. So, so you can do it that way as well.
Ricardo in Mexico would like to know, how can I prevent the mothworms, aka wax moths?
Okay, so a healthy beehive won't let wax moth into the hive, but you might find in the tray at the bottom here, you'll get some wax moths taking advantage of the wax that falls through. And just to sort that out, all you need to do is clean out your tray from time to time, every month or two, to get rid of that build up, and then the wax moth issue will go away. If you've got a really weak colony, wax moth could start to invade, but it's a secondary problem. The initial problem is perhaps your queen is not laying enough eggs, or you've got some other disease issue that's slowing down your hive. Okay, so we've switched that off now, and we've left the key for definitely longer than a minute here. So we can pack up the harvest now just by putting this little cap in the top, and we can pull this tube out. Now you can just rest it on the jar like that to let the remaining honey drain into your jar, and we can then go ahead and pack up this shelf. So I'm going to just close this.
You missed the cup.
Here. Oh, thank you. Well done. Cap needs to go in, otherwise that would have made a sticky mess. And the door closes. Cover strip at the top called the key access cover, and you're all set. Don't forget to close the windows on your hive. It's okay to leave the windows off for a while to observe, but you don't really want to leave it off all day. You get a lot of solar heating coming through the window as the sun's shining in, so do make sure you put your window covers back on as well. And that way you won't get that sun pouring into your hive. Now that one actually goes on the other side. Sometimes there's anomalies in the wood, and you can then swap them around again and the covers will close. Thank you very much for watching. Let us know what you'd like us to tune in on next week, and we'll have something interesting to show you. And thank you very much for all your beginning questions. If you want a handhold to get started, have a look at the beekeeper.org. It's a great online course with experts from all around the world, and also a fundraiser for the bees and habitat and advocacy for these little heroes of our world that do an incredible amount of work that's so important to the whole food chain we rely on.